Welcome to the chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 240 of Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Shane Haff, and you can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL. And I'm joined today by the best co-host in the game. It is Mark Henry Jr. Give him a follow on Twitter at Mark Henry Jr. NFL. Mark, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Tomorrow, I'm going on vacation. When I get back from vacation, it's fantasy draft weekend. I'm ready to go. I've got a couple fantasy drafts the next couple weeks. I always say August is fantasy draft month, and that's what kicks me into high gear. But what also kicks me into high gear is these divisional previews that Shane and I do every year.
Absolutely. And speaking of fantasy football, I'm going to need your draft guide this year. I mentioned this last week, but I've been putting together a league for some of the boys at church because my son wants to do one. And I, notably, not a big fantasy football guy.
Yes.
I think I've used the word hate before. But when my son wants to do something fun with football, we'll make it happen. So we're going to have a 12-team league. I've already got the league settings from Mark. I'm going to need some draft guide help too. So I'm going to be hitting you up for that. Our draft is on the 29th. It's a week from this coming Saturday. So we still got some time before we hit that. And we also have some time before the NFL season starts, which means we are in our divisional preview series. Mark already mentioned that last week. We previewed all 8 teams from the East divisions, the NFC and the AFC East. We gave you their key losses and additions, the top storylines going into this season, some information about their schedule, and then made some predictions. And today we are turning our attention to the Norths, the NFC North, maybe one of the more fascinating divisions in football. In terms of top to bottom, NFC West, really interesting too when you get the reigning champs and you get the Rams who made the power play for Myles Garrett, and we'll get to them. Overall, NFC, I feel like, is a lot more interesting this year than the AFC, but we're going to dive in and talk about it. And so let's kick this off with the NFC North, and we'll take these teams in order of placement last year within their division. So we'll start off with the Chicago Bears, who in the first year with Ben Johnson, they go 11-6. They beat their division rival Packers in the wild card round 31-27, and then they lose to the Rams 20-17 in overtime in the divisional round. So good season for the Ben Johnson-led Bears. I know that's a hire that, let's be honest, everybody in football loved that hire, and as long as you're not a fan of an NFC North team. And I think it played out really well in year one. So they lose DJ Moore this offseason. Their center, Drew Dahlman, retired. And they also lost safety Jaquan Brisker, safety Kevin Byard, and linebacker Tremaine Edmonds. So in the first round, they lose both safeties, so they go out and they spend a first-round pick on safety Dylan Tieneman. They also picked up Garrett Bradbury to replace Drew Dahlman as their center. They got Jedrick Wills to play tackle, Khalif Raymond, Kobe Bryant, some of their other additions throughout the offseason. I think one of the biggest questions going into this season is, can Caleb Williams become a more consistent player? I mean, he was excellent at times last season, and you see all the come from behinds. I mean, they had 7 one-score wins last year. A lot of them were in dramatic come from behind fashion. And so you can question if the regression is coming there for them. But really, my main question is about Caleb Williams. Tremendously high highs, still struggles to play in rhythm on a down-to-down basis. And I felt like that got better as the year went along. In year 2 with Ben Johnson, as Ben Johnson is figuring him out, will we see more consistency? I feel like I talk about Caleb Williams in the same way I talked about Jordan Love a couple of years ago. Obviously, the highs are higher, but it's that down-to-down consistency. So they do have a difficult schedule this year. It's the 26th easiest schedule, but they do rank first in rest differential at plus 15 days. So they have that going for them. Their over-under win total is sitting at 9.5. Mark, what do you think about these Bears going into the year?
So this is a funny exercise, as the NFL chat that I mention here way too often. This morning we were talking about teams I'm trying to think the right way to word it, but teams we were most worried about our take being wrong on. Like, we give our record predictions, and if you look at those records and you look at it and say, if I'm going to be way off on one of these, which one is it? And for me, it's probably me saying that the Bears aren't going to regress and that they're going to win 12 games, because that's where I'm at. I think the Bears are going to stay really good. I think, straight from Ben Johnson's lips to our ears, they are the quote unquote number one regression candidate. And I understand all of the reasons why, and they're valid reasons. But the thing is, I believe in Ben Johnson that much. I believe in Caleb Williams that much. I believe in the offensive talent around Caleb Williams that much. You have Rome Odunze and Luther Burden. Burden is hurt, Colston Loveland, and a really good O-line. There are a lot of concerns on defense. I think this is going to be a pretty bad defense. Now, I think the question is, will the offense be elite enough to handle that? My answer right now is yes. But like I said, if I'm going to be wrong on, any of these teams, if you tell me what's the team that you were off by the most games on, the Bears are in that conversation. Could I see the Bears winning 7 games this year? Absolutely. If the defense is terrible, you get a couple offensive injuries, maybe Caleb has one of those kind of step back years we've seen when quarterbacks do step up at a young age. All of that is incredibly possible. I'm not betting against Ben Johnson is where I'm at, because I think he's a special coach.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the record in one-score games, 7 wins in one-score games last year, which is hard to do. And then I think the obvious reference point is the Chiefs, who were 11 in one-score games 2 years ago. And then last year, they're 1-9 in one-score games, and they missed the playoffs. And obviously, that's not a one-to-one comparison. There's other factors. But typically, when you want to talk regression candidates, you can look at teams that excelled in those circumstances and just naturally predict that not as many of those games are going to break your way this year. Now, I don't necessarily – I think there can be like a clutch quarterback. I don't think there's such a thing really as a clutch team. I think there's plenty of evidence to bear out that there's a lot of luck when it comes down to consistently winning those one-score games.
Absolutely agree with you. Obviously, I will say, and I think I've said this before on pods about other coaches. I'd have to go back and kind of track to see if it tracked or not. But I do think even more than quarterback play determining that one-score game, I think it's coaching. I think when you have one of the best coaches in football, you have a really good chance to kind of out scheme the other guy at the end of the game when it comes down to timeout management, calling the right plays, whether to be aggressive or not. And I think that's why you saw, Sean Payton have such an incredible year in one-score games last year. And people are saying, oh, can the Broncos keep it up in one-score games? I think they probably can, because I think Sean Payton's that good. The Bears, they had such great success in one-score game. Can they keep it up? Maybe not to the same with Denver. Maybe not to the same degree, but I do think they are going to win a lot of one-score games, and they're going to usually, come out in the end on top, I think, if it comes down to a match of wits. And I think you could say the same for a lot of these guys. Funny enough, the 2 guys who came to mind who I think are the opposite, despite how great they are McVay and Shanahan, because I feel like often we complain about what they do at the end of games, despite them being the best coaches in football. Reed's up there too. Yeah, Reed's weird like that. But yeah, it's funny, but I think there are a handful of coaches out there who I just trust to get it done late in games.
Yeah. You mentioned the Broncos. 13 of their 17 games were one-score games last year, and they went 11-2 in those 13 games. So,
and I like Sean Payton's message on that, by the way. He's saying yeah, we're not going to have the same record in one-score games. Let's have less of them.
Yeah.
He's like, let's go out and win by 10, win by 20, whatever it takes to not put us in position to regress in that stat. I think that's a great message.
Yeah. Great comment here from Zach chiming in the YouTube chat. Says, I missed y'all. Used to listen to this religiously when I was a dog groomer, and then I got a job where I couldn't listen during work, and then got another job where I can listen to you live. That's awesome. Glad you're here in the chat. And just to all of our other listeners listening back on the podcast feed later, we love you guys. You should probably change jobs so you can listen to us live. That's all I'm saying.
By the way, what a fun job, dog groomer. That's great. I love dogs. My dog right behind me trying to get into everything because we just came back from a trip. Now we're going on a trip. So there's bags and stuff everywhere. And she is an absolute menace behind me on this podcast, as people can.
Yeah. And for those of you that are trying to listen live, we always appreciate comments and things. We will be in a more normal schedule once the season starts. We'll try to get back on Monday mornings or occasionally Tuesdays as we're doing whole league recaps. So we've kind of done when it's convenient for us throughout the offseason, but we'll have a little more consistency once the season starts in our show times and dates. So that'll make it a little easier for you guys to plan, perhaps. But let's move on to the second place team in the NFC North last year. That's the Green Bay Packers, who went 9-7-1 before losing in the wild card round to the Bears 31-27. They lose Malik Willis. He goes to Miami this offseason. They lose Romeo Doubs, Quay Walker, Elton Jenkins, and Kingsley Enagbare. Their key additions, they bring in Jonathan Gannon to replace Jeff Hafley, who also departs for Miami. They get Javon Hargrave, Benjamin St-Juste. Again, there's a huge question for them, and it's what impact will Micah Parsons make coming off of his injury? Like, you traded 2 first-round picks and a player for the guy. I think it was a good trade, but then he goes and he gets hurt. Obviously that's just chance, but how he comes off of that injury and the timeline with which he comes off of that injury is going to be huge for this Packers season. And then on the other side of the ball, you just have to wonder, do the Packers have a wide receiver 1 for Jordan Love to lean on? You've got Tucker Kraft, obviously, who's also coming off an injury, by the way. And then you lose, Romeo Doubs, you lose Wicks. And so it's Matthew Golden time. You need Matthew Golden to step up. You need Christian Watson to stay healthy. And even at that, this is an organization that hasn't had a true wide receiver 1 since early in Aaron Rodgers' career. And I'm still not sure that they do. And so that's a big question that remains to be answered. Their strength of schedule, they have the 24th easiest schedule. It's a difficult schedule, kind of like the Bears, but they are 18th in rest differential at -2 days compared to their opponents. Their over-under win totals at 9.5. Mark, talk to me about the Packers.
I think that there's been a lot of years on this show where either I or both of us have been really high on the Packers. And we've come into the year high on the Packers. We've been scared of the Packers as a potential Eagles playoff opponent. I remember especially 2 years ago when the Eagles played the Packers in the wild card round in our route to the Super Bowl. That was the team in the NFC I was most worried about that year. And I was so upset that we had to play them in the first round. I think people forget that was a weird game. We won 22-10. We also we recovered a kickoff right away that we scored on. So kind of like 15-10 game. And then we got gifted a touchdown at the beginning. A tougher game than I think people remember. Random tangent there by me. My apologies. But I'm kind of out on the Packers this year. And I have a Packers fan buddy who's been coming at me how much I've been talking about it. Where are the Packers better than they've been the last couple years? That's a legitimate question because Josh Jacobs had, grain of salt on a lot of the metrics, but I think they were 26th in EPA in rushing last year. Josh Jacobs, I think, had a big drop off on a lot of the metrics that the nerds like to look at in terms of his efficiency, not to mention he got arrested. I forget, honestly, it was something bad, but maybe domestic violence or something along that line. And I think he's just going to play, but can't imagine he hasn't had a distracted offseason and the team probably distracted with him. Who knows? Maybe he gets suspended. We have no idea. The receivers, there's a couple teams that I think we've joked about for a couple years having a ton of receivers, but not one guy. And they all kind of let half of them go, but didn't add any. Like the Colts come to mind also. The Colts had all these pretty good receivers and they let 3 of them go. Now they don't have that many good receivers, but they still don't have the top guy. The Packers are kind of the same thing. Like you let Romeo Doubs go. You let Dontavion Wicks go. I think there's another receiver who's not coming to my mind who they let go. And it's like, okay, yeah, you don't have this depth of receivers anymore. That's fine. Maybe you structure the offense and you know exactly who you're targeting a bit more often. But it's not like you added anybody. It's Christian Watson, who we know can't stay healthy, and it's Matthew Golden. And Matthew Golden hasn't shown anything. I'm a big Tucker Kraft guy. I love Tucker Kraft. But you're also relying on Tucker Kraft to come back from a brutal injury. And allegedly, he looks great. And the doctors are saying he's doing fantastic and he's going to play week 1. And I'm really high on Tucker Kraft from a fantasy standpoint. Then you look at the O-line. They let Rasheed Walker, their one offensive tackle, walk. They didn't really add anything on that offensive line to get better than they were last year, where I think they were kind of middle of the road, fine. And then you look at defense, didn't really add anything legitimate. Like, who's the best player that the Packers added to this team that has been a 7 seed for 3 straight years? And I think some people are going to look at that and say, oh, well, they'll just be a 7 seed again. They'll win 9 or 10 games and they'll be fine. At some point, regression's coming. And I know LaFleur just signed an extension, I believe, after last year. This feels to me like we've talked about iceberg teams before. I think this feels a little bit like an iceberg team. Like this could be a little bit of a disaster if Micah Parsons isn't playing until week 5 or 6. And the defense, I don't think is very good outside of those 3 big players. You have Micah Parsons, you have Edgerrin Cooper, and you have Xavier McKinney. 3 really great players at all 3 levels of the defenses. Do you love what else they have on that defense outside of that, Shane? Because I remember doing our expansion series, and I don't remember thinking that there was a great defense outside of those big 3.
Yeah, and let's not look past the fact that they just downgraded from Jeff Hafley to Jonathan Gannon as well. So it was last week, I believe, Adam Schefter said that the Josh Jacobs situation was still under review. It's a pending situation. So criminal charges weren't filed against him relating to a domestic violence issue. I think it was back in like May or June, but that's still outstanding. And I wouldn't be surprised if he misses. And I think kind of the norm for domestic violence stuff is like 6 games. So if they lose him, they're going to lose him for a significant period of time. So you're right. That's hanging over him too. And that's something I kind of forgot about until you mentioned it.
They don't have a backup plan. Like this is a little fantasy nugget. I've been drafting a lot of Marshawn Lloyd, who is probably the backup. Like if you're just looking at it, like it's not like they have great options. They also have like a couple other names. Damian Martinez was a guy that they drafted like in the 7th round this year. Pierre Strong, a kind of a journeyman guy, another undrafted guy. Like he's probably the backup Marshawn Lloyd. He's not going like in the top 500 in fantasy drafts in ADP. And I think that that's wrong because like you said, there's this Josh Jacobs thing hanging over it. They don't really have another backup. And I think it's a little weird that people aren't. I don't know. Maybe that's a sign that the suspension's coming next year because that happens a lot. But yeah, I don't. Again, like, where is the upside for this Packers team? Something else that I've been talking about, and it's been bothering me when we get to. And I think you had him a lot higher than I did when we did our QB rankings. I can't remember. I have noticed a shift in the way Jordan Love is talked about that I just don't think he's earned. I'm not a Jordan Love hater at all. I've been a defender, I think, in the last couple of years on this show. I feel like something happened last year that I must have missed because I think the way he's getting talked about when I'm hearing QB rankings pods today compared to a year ago is much different when I don't think Jordan Love showed me anything last year that I didn't already know about Jordan Love.
I mean, he did lead all QBs in EPA per dropback last season.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think a lot of those metrics he did really well in, but like we were on this pod like complaining about him a lot after games. I felt like there were a lot of games where it felt like he didn't take that step where or maybe when they played a really good defense, he didn't show up. But yeah, there are those stats out there, but then the counting stats, I don't know what just fell there, but the counting stats are kind of worse than they've been. I understand you could point to the weapons, but they've kind of been the same weapons the last couple of years. I guess maybe I'm wrong, and the EPA heads can tell me I'm wrong, and they have, but I don't think his year last year leveled him up to me. I think he was what I knew him to be, which is like the 11th-ish best quarterback, and I think people are kind of putting him into that 6-7 conversation. And like, we both had Jalen a lot higher than most people are going to have on their QB lists, obviously. Maybe we just, respect winners. And then, but if you say to like a national person or someone who's outside of the Eagles land or whatever, I have Jalen above Jordan Love, like they're going to talk to you like you're crazy. And Jordan Love's been a 7 seed 3 straight years. Like at a certain point, he's got to do something to make that crazy to me.
To be fair, if you tell most national people you have Jalen above Sam Darnold, they'll look at you like you're crazy. So that's not the best indicator.
I know. Yeah,
for what it's worth, I had Jordan Love 8th. You had him 13th. I had Jalen 7th. You had him 8th. So
who did I have 10, 11, 12? Jaden. Did I have Jaden and then Lawrence
10,
and then
Caleb?
And then Caleb.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Love is very much in that group to me of guys who was number 9? Sorry to make you run down my QB
9 was
list.
Dak.
Dak's a little above that for me. So 10, 11, 12, 13 to me is very much like a Jaden, Trevor, I'm blanking, Jaden, Trevor, Caleb, and Love. To me, all could be top 5 on that list next year. If they come out and, you win 12 games, you put up a ton of stats, you're great in all the metrics, all that stuff, you look great to the eye test, you're an MVP candidate. Any of them could be an MVP candidate if things broke right.
I'm sorry, Mark. Production is telling me that we can't refer to them as potential top 5 because that's misusing Jaden Daniels' number. So I'm going to need you to re-say that and say they could be top 4, and we'll edit that out in post-production.
Not top 4. That's fair.
We don't want to cease and desist from Jaden Daniels' legal team.
Funny story that no one cares about. I was in New Orleans this week for work, and literally the day that came out, I was on Bourbon Street that day. And I stopped in a like a sports memorabilia store, and they had a whole Jaden Daniels like area on the wall. So I just thought that was funny that then later that day he's coming out against college merchandise again. Whatever. I have a lot of thoughts on that I'm going to keep to myself on Jaden Daniels and maybe his mother. But
Commanders fans will come after you online. Let me tell you that.
Man, yes, they will. Yeah, which I don't mind, whatever. But weird stuff, in my opinion. I think he's a bit of a weirdo. But yeah, I think any of those guys could be top tier, like next, like MVP candidate quarterbacks. I think they all need to show me one full year of consistency where their team wins at a high level and they put up high numbers. Maybe that's asking too much. I don't know. But Jaden obviously had the rookie year. Trevor we've talked about how many, Trevor had the 16 game stretch from the second half of, is it 23 into the first half of 24 or whatever it is, or maybe 22 into 23. And then last year he has that final 8 to 10 game stretch or whatever that is where he looks elite. Caleb obviously has that stretch to close last year where he looks elite. Jordan Love, Toyotathon Jordan Love has had those stretches where he looks elite for sure. But none of those guys have put it together. And I guess Trevor Lawrence won 13 games last year as the quietest 13 game winner of all time. But I think all 4 of them need to show me one more full year before I put them in some of the conversations I've heard Jordan Love in that I haven't necessarily heard Trevor or Caleb in, who I am just as high on. I guess I'm higher on, given my rankings.
Well, let's move on to a team that would love to have any of those quarterbacks play really awesome for them this year so they could let them walk in free agency to go win a Super Bowl with a different team. Let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings, who went 9-8 after the disastrous Sam Darnold decision last offseason.
By the way, time out. There was news in the NFL world that I do think is relevant. We were talking fantasy. Breece Hall, non-contact injury in practice, by the way. That is brutal for people who have drafted already. For Breece Hall, obviously, and for Jets fans out there, man, not a lot to look forward to if you're a Jets fan. At least Breece Hall, running back who you just paid, by the way. Yeah, that's brutal.
Didn't he have a season ender? Was it his rookie year?
He did have. I don't remember if it was I don't remember what it was. I'm really bad at remembering injuries.
I'm trying to look up his stat line, but for some reason Google Chrome is blocking my access to Pro Football Reference. So Google Chrome. Get your crap together, or I'm changing browsers. That's all. If there's anybody out there listening to the pod that works for Google Chrome, according to ESPN, it was his rookie season. He only played 7 games. I think that was an ACL. I don't remember for certain, but hopefully he's okay. So okay,
everything that I'm searching now is coming up with what just happened, so I can't find. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was an ACL. It was a season ender, his rookie season. But so the Vikings go 9-8 last season. They lose Jonathan Allen, Jalen Naylor, and Javon Hargrave this offseason. In the first round, they selected Caleb Banks to help reload that defensive line. They go out and say sign Kyler Murray. They get Jawan Jennings. I mean, the only question for this team is, will they have adequate quarterback play? And I mean, this is probably Kyler Murray's last chance. You get Kevin O'Connell. If this season does not go well and Kevin O'Connell gets fired this offseason, which I think would happen, this offseason is going to be hilarious because we're going to get him dishing all kinds of dirt about how he wanted to keep Sam Darnold and the front office didn't, and we'll get all kinds of drama if that plays out. but it's all going to be on Kyler Murray's shoulders. He has been announced as starting quarterback. They have the 15th easiest schedule. They're 11th in rest differential at plus 4 days. Their over-under win total is at 8.5. Mark, what do you think about the Vikings?
This is another one that I am very much not confident in my opinion on. So this is a funny thing. I have my 6 NFC playoff teams in ink, and I have 7 in the AFC in ink, and I'll just say them right here. I have the Eagles, I have the Lions, I have the Saints, I have the Rams, and then I have the Seahawks and the Bears. I have changed my mind on who that 7th seed in the NFC is like 5 times, and I have about 5 or 6 teams at 8 and 9. And I keep changing who that team that gets to 9 and 8 and gets the 7 seed. I did try the Vikings on one of these last couple weeks because the argument for the Vikings is so clear. It's clear as day. Brian Flores cooks again, despite the personnel not being good enough to cook. This is the 3rd year in a row where I think Minnesota has serious problems on personnel in terms of defense, but 2 years in a row where Brian Flores cooked up a top 5 defense. I assume he's probably going to at least cook up a top 10 defense with how good of a job he does every year. And then the other argument, which I'm incredibly partial to, what if JJ McCarthy is just that bad? Because I think that's very possible. That I'm not a Kyler guy, but if JJ McCarthy, Kyler's a professional NFL quarterback. I don't think JJ McCarthy is. So if you tell me Kyler comes in and he's just the 20th best quarterback in the NFL with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and a really good offensive line if they're healthy, and not a great running game, but a really good play caller in KOC, I absolutely see the upside for them to win 11 games, let alone go above the 8.5 number. I have them under that win total. By the way, I also had the Packers. I don't think I ever said I had them under, but I think it should have been clear how I was talking about them. I have the Vikings going under that 8.5, but man, it's so easy to see them going over it. But also, you told me they have one of the widest ranges of outcomes in the NFL to me. Because if you told me like everything I just laid out goes right and they win 11, 12 games, compete for the division, would I be shocked? No, we've seen the Vikings be pretty good a bunch of times recently with kind of similar idea of what they'd be trying to do this year. But if you told me it all fell off a cliff, Kyler stunk and is done, KOC gets fired, the run game was horrible, maybe Jefferson had an injury or Addison had an injury or Darrisaw, who's had a ton of injuries, gets hurt, maybe the defense is 14th instead of top 5, maybe they go 5-12. Or 6-11, and it's a brutal division. Detroit, Chicago, Green Bay, really tough division. So I think this might be the single team with the widest range of outcomes in the NFL to me. I'm going very slight over, and I wouldn't bet it with your money, let alone mine.
Yeah, it's just I'm not high on the Vikings, but it's hard to believe that a team that won 9 games last year wouldn't win 9 games this year when they replaced JJ McCarthy.
So the one thing I'll say about that is
they were the defense.
They were 5-8. They did win a couple games in December against teams that maybe weren't trying, and they did it with the one win against Detroit when they were trying, which was weird, where they won like 13-7, I think. But I said that argument to someone, and they did rebut that, and I was like, that's a pretty good rebuttal. But you're right. No matter what you say, they only lost 8 games.
I lean the under because I don't think they're going to be a good football team, but I do have a hard time thinking they'll be worse with Kyler Murray than they were with JJ McCarthy, who's just didn't even look like he belonged in the NFL.
Yeah.
But okay, let's go to the last team in the division, the Detroit Lions. They went 9-8 last year. They lose defensive tackle DJ Reader, linebacker Alex Anzalone, cornerback Amik Robertson. They add a new offensive coordinator in Drew Petzing, which is not a guy that I like, but I've heard a lot of buzz about him. And so maybe he will settle into a good role there, just in a different situation. They select offensive tackle Blake Miller with a 1st-round pick. They got Cade Mays to be their center, but he has since fractured his wrist and will be out for most of the regular season. So offensive line might continue to be an issue there. They get right tackle Larry Borum. I think the question here is, can Dan Campbell work without Ben Johnson? There's no denying the culture shift and the way the city and the team embraced Dan Campbell, and it was a tremendously bad culture he needed to turn around. But last year did not go well. He didn't seem capable of running the offense once he realized he made a bad offensive hire. Now, that said, it's one season, and everybody makes a bad hire. And so a lot of that's going to fall on Drew Petzing. Is he up to the task of running the offense? Because we don't necessarily think that Dan Campbell can step in and do that. They do have a favorable schedule. They have the easiest schedule in the NFL this season. They rank 15th in rest differential at +1 day, and their over-under win total is at 10.5. Mark, what do you think about the Lions?
The Lions historically have been a team that I have been low on compared to consensus on this podcast. And I think you've kind of bounced back and forth. I think there's been times you've been low, times you've gotten the hype. But we both have felt the wrath of Lions Twitter before for different draft picks and decisions. I think they've been right on a couple of them, in fairness to them, but they can be a crazy Twitter who I've fought with. And I've gotten some wins the last couple of years by proclaiming multiple times that the Lions will not win the Super Bowl when they were NFC favorites or Super Bowl favorites, and they have not come close to that. And I think people have stopped talking about Dan Campbell like he's the best coach in football, which was always what annoyed me. He's a good coach. He's a pretty good coach. But I think people were getting insane, and I think that was always what kind of stuck in my craw with the Lions and Campbell and the way that they were talked about. Maybe it's all that. Maybe it's that I love a good post-hype sleeper. I think this team could win the Super Bowl this year, the Detroit Lions. I have them as a top 5 team in the NFL, and that is independent of the fact that they play the Jets, Cardinals, Dolphins, Falcons, and Titans, who are 4 of the 6 worst teams in the NFL, in my opinion. Not to mention the Saints and Panthers, who I'm a little higher on, but are no world beaters. And that's not even mentioning the Bucks, who I think are going to take a huge step back. The Vikings, who I just mentioned, could be, a bad team if things break wrong. The Giants, who I think are going to be bad. So it's like, you really, to me, only have about 6 games on here of teams who are going to have 10 plus wins. That's pretty nice. Like, the Lions' schedule, I think, is pretty nicely set up for them to potentially, we look up in week 15 and they're 13-1, or they're 12-2, and they're fighting with the Rams for that 1 seed, or maybe even because of their schedule compared to the Rams, maybe they're just the 1 seed. Who knows? But the Lions, I have never bought the hype as for them as a contender as much as I am this year. And it's of course something that you have to say with this Lions defense is if they stay healthy. And Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph already are coming in banged up. But I do think this defense is a little deeper than they've been in past years. You have Aiden Hutchinson. They went out and they drafted Derek Moore in the second round, a guy who I was pretty high on, to add to some of the other guys who they've tried out across from Hutchinson. Aleem McNeil back from injury. Tyleek Williams stepping into year 2. You have obviously a stud in Jack Campbell at linebacker. And then you've got, even behind the secondary, I think has a little bit more depth and a few more guys who have played to it. You added Keith Abney as a late round pick in the draft, who was a guy who people thought should go on day 2. I just think there's a little more depth to this defense, to where if they suffer some injuries, they're going to be a little bit better than they've been the last couple of years. It's also year 2 of Kelvin Shepard, the defensive coordinator there. So you kind of think maybe he can settle into a role, especially if they're a little bit more healthy. But you mentioned the Drew Petzing thing. I'm not a Petzing guy. I complained about that Cardinals regime for a long time. The whole Gannon, Petzing, Kyler regime, I said, needed to be entirely scrubbed from the facility, and they did that.
One by one.
Yeah, they did it. But this is a pretty nice job to walk into if you're Drew Petzing, where you've got, in my opinion, the offensive player of the year of 2026 in Jahmyr Gibbs. You've got 2 top flight wide receivers. You've got a great tight end. Now you've got some things to figure out on that O-line without Cade Mays. I'm sure you can figure it out, though. I think when you have the tackle play they do, it makes things a little easier, because I think Blake Miller's going to step right in. I don't know if he's going to be great or anything, but the thing I thought about when I scouted Blake Miller was, no matter what you thought of him, I think he's a finished product. Like, I think he's ready to go and ready to play right now. So I think the Lions are going to be really good. I have 6 teams in football who I think I know what the Super Bowl is. It's going to be one of these 3 NFC teams against one of these 3 AFC teams. That's what I have the Lions in that mix. I do think the Lions are very, very live to go win the Super Bowl.
Yeah. You only have 3 NFC teams.
Yeah.
Who
I do not have the team. I do not have either team that made the Super Bowl last year in my potential Super Bowl.
Okay. That answers that. All right, let's move to the AFC North. The Pittsburgh Steelers go 10-7 last season because of course they did. They lose in the first round of the playoffs because of course they did. They lose Isaac Seumalo and Kenny Gainwell. They also lose their head coach. Mike Tomlin departs. They hire Mike McCarthy because they have to hire a coach named Mike. They go out and they get Michael Pittman Jr., Rico Dowdle, Jaquan Brisker, Jamel Dean, and Max Ahinachor is their first-round pick after the Eagles sniped them from Mekhi Lemon. Questions for this season? It's really... Well, first of all, can Michael Pittman add another threat to the offense, a consistent threat opposite DK Metcalf? And then it's all just age-related questions. What's the upside here? Is Aaron Rodgers going to look so jumpy under pressure this year and never push the ball downfield? Can TJ Watt bounce back at 31 years old? I mean, in 2023, he had 19 sacks. In 2024, that dropped to 11.5, and then last season it went down to 7. And so they've got so many old guys on this roster. And honestly, I've got a couple of friends that are big Steelers fans. Honestly, I feel like the best thing that could happen this season is that they just bottom out. Like, not wishing injuries on people, but the best potential outcome I see for the Steelers is if Aaron Rodgers gets injured, they play Drew Aller, he's terrible, and you end up with the top 5 pick next year. Because otherwise, this team is going to continue to be what they've always been, which is a 9-win team that's a threat to nobody. So, can they get to the playoffs this year? Yes. It's really tough to go into a year thinking that, man, I hope my team bottoms out, but that's what needs to happen for the Steelers. So they got the 17th easiest schedule, 24th in rest differential, minus 6 days. Their over-under win total is 8.5. I saw you shaking your head when I said, can they make the playoffs? I'm not predicting that. I don't think this is going to be a very good football team, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility for Steelers fans to root for. I just don't think it's the best ultimate outcome.
I have a lot of Steelers fans in my life who have been coming after me for my Steelers negativity, and we can talk plenty about things that I have a problem with on the roster. You look at that at the corner room outside of Joey Porter Jr.
Before the season even kicks off, everyone's making predictions. Who wins the division? Who makes the playoffs? Who's lifting the trophy at season's end? On Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, you can trade those predictions in a live market. For instance, can the Pittsburgh Steelers win at least 9 games this season? If the Steelers do, they're currently trading at 45% probability. A $100 trade pays out over $200 if the Steelers reach just 9 wins. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. Trade the draft pick, the game, and more on Kalshi. Download the Kalshi app and use code FFSN to get up to $500 in bonus credits when you trade $25. KALSHI. Kalshi. Trade on anything.
That's a bit of a yikes. I think that there's a lot of concerns, not to mention, Jaquan Brisker can't stay healthy at safety, and Jalen Ramsey is very old and wasn't very good last year. So I have a ton of concerns with that secondary. I obviously have a ton of concerns with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, who also lost Isaac Seumalo at guard, one of the best guards in the league last year, at least how he was graded out. He's getting replaced by someone who played, 387 snaps last year. They are potentially going to throw Ahinachor in at some point for Broderick Jones, but that's probably a bit of a question mark there at that tackle spot. I mentioned that their quarterback is 55 years old. And then, not to mention, let's take kind of the rationale and reason for why I'm out on some of the Steelers roster out of it. If you've watched football for long enough, I think you have a grasp on how certain narratives should play out and are going to play out. I'm just telling you, Mike Tomlin sitting at the NBC halftime show and pregame show, they are going to be turning him and being like, man, Mike, you're Steelers. And everybody's going to be talking about the fact that, wow, I can't believe Mike Tomlin was able to keep them afloat all those years and make the playoffs and go above 500 all those years. And look what happened once Mike Tomlin left. You don't appreciate what you have until it's gone. Team X, Y, Z, Q, R, T, Z should all hire Mike Tomlin. If you don't think that's how this is playing out, in my opinion, you just haven't followed football that closely. People can clip that if the Steelers go out and win 9 games. I don't think they're going to. I have them winning 6 games. I think it could be worse than that. I really do. And I think it could be the best thing that could happen to them, like you said, for it to be worse than that. But I don't see the upside. I think the Mike McCarthy hire was a joke. I think going from Mike Tomlin to Mike McCarthy is an absolute joke. And I'm not even the biggest Mike Tomlin guy out there. I think that there are very real questions to ask about Mike Tomlin in terms of whether or not he is a ceiling capper at this point. I think you could say, like, maybe he's not going to be able to take you to the heights of winning a Super Bowl now, and maybe there's a cap to the upside around Tomlin. He's very clearly a floor elevator beyond, most coaches we've ever seen in the sport. And I think he elevated that floor for quite some time. And it reminds me of when this is in our run of this podcast, when Sean Payton left the Saints and people were like, oh no, the Saints are just going to win the division again next year. And I'm like, you guys should know better than anybody how important Sean Payton is. And They did not. They did not go to the playoffs that next year. They continued to be bad once he left. So I kind of feel the same way about Mike Tomlin.
Yeah. All right, let's keep rolling. Baltimore Ravens went 8-9 last season. They lose center Tyler Linderbaum, first-round pick from several years ago, who signed a $27 million a year deal with the Las Vegas Raiders. They also lose Isaiah Likely, Draymond Jones, Charlie Kohler. They bring in Jesse Minter to be their new head coach and pair him up with Declan Doyle, the offensive coordinator for Ben Johnson's Chicago Bears last year. They have the weirdness with trading for an edge rusher and then backing out of the trade and then signing Trey Hendrickson in free agency. They also acquire John Simpson, an offensive guard, Jalen Hawkins, safety, defensive lineman Calais Campbell, cornerback Chidobe Awuzie, and then their first-round pick is spent on the interior offensive line on Venga Ioane. And so, questions for the Ravens. Can they finally get over the playoff hump? They have consistently made it to the playoffs, but they cannot get past Kansas City and Buffalo, who have combined to end their last 3 playoff appearances, at least that Lamar played in. You have the one weird year where he was hurt. But in those 3 games, Lamar has thrown an interception and had a fumble in each of those 3 games. And so can they get over that hump? And then is Derrick Henry still going to be Derrick Henry? He's coming off back-to-back seasons of 300-plus touches, and he'll be 32. If anybody can sustain that workload, it's Derrick Henry. You got to assume at some point in time, Father Time will come for Derrick Henry. There haven't been many signs of it, though. So can they get another solid year out of Derrick Henry like that? They have the 5th easiest schedule in the NFL, so maybe that bodes well. Maybe they can spell Derrick Henry at times. They are 21st in rest differential at -3 days, and their over-under win total is 11.5. Thoughts on the Ravens, Mark?
Ravens are an interesting one. I would say this. I'm pretty out on the Ravens as a contender.
Okay.
I don't view the Ravens as a team that can make the Super Bowl or a team that can win the Super Bowl or make a run. And I think that's a failure at this point if you have Lamar Jackson on your team. And if you're a Ravens fan, I think you have to be going into every year thinking you can win the Super Bowl. I think they do. And by the way, Vegas does. Vegas thinks this team's going to be really good, and they think they're a real deal contender. This is another one of those, what did you improve? Like you said, Derrick Henry, another year older. You lost Isaiah Likely behind Mark Andrews, who's another year older. You lost Tyler Linderbaum, your best offensive lineman, who's gone. Obviously, you add Vega Ioane, a rookie, but again, he's a rookie. Ronnie Stanley getting up there in age. The one thing that I do love, and we talked about this with Buffalo, we were both out on Sean McDermott. I think at a certain point, the voice loses luster there. I think we got to that point in Baltimore. I don't think either of us were out on John Harbaugh the way we were out on Sean McDermott, but it got to a point where I think we were both ready for them to move on. Did they make the right hire? I don't know. People like Jesse Minter a lot, and the answer on if they made the right hire or not, Minter's going to have to step in, and in year 1, he's got to take that Ravens defense and make it a top 10 unit. My guess is that he probably does it. I think there's enough to work with to make this team a fringe top 10 unit. And if that happens, I think there's probably enough to work with on that offense to make that a fringe top 10 unit. And in my opinion, that leads to, I think we're talking about like an 11-ish win team. So I'm going under that win total, which is, it's 11.5, right?
Yes, 11.5.
I'm going under that win total. I have them confidently in the playoffs. 11.5 is a high number. For a team with Lamar Jackson, who's had injury issues, obviously, and a Lamar Jackson who, let's be honest, when he played last year was not the same Lamar Jackson. And that does not bring me any joy. I have a Lamar Jackson Louisville jersey hanging upstairs. I want Lamar Jackson to be great for a long time. And I think he's gotten good enough as a passer that he's going to be around a long time, no matter what, even if his athleticism degrades a bit. But for him to be Superman Lamar, that can lead this team and put him on their back and break the narrative about him, he's got to be the Lamar from the past couple of years, not the Lamar from last year. So that's a big kind of storyline. They went out and you hired a defensive coordinator as your head coach. Hopefully Declan Doyle can step in for Baltimore. He was Ben Johnson's coffee boy / offensive coordinator last year in Chicago. Hopefully he can step in and he can, right away get this offense humming again. And that's a big task for a first-year play caller. But I think they'll do it to a certain degree. I just don't think I don't believe in all of the ifs enough to call them a contender. The Lamar if he's changing as a player, the Jesse Minter if as a coach, the Declan Doyle if as a coach, the Derrick Henry if he's going to continue doing this, if the Mark Andrews if he's going to stay healthy and not be the kind of shell of himself he's been at times lately. One kind of glimmer of optimism and sunshine that I've heard from Ravens training camp is Jacoby Lane, a guy who I really liked in the draft process, has apparently been turning heads there at wide receiver. Kind of a bigger, they used him in the slot a lot at USC, but a bigger wide receiver. Could be interesting if he steps in and they found a diamond in the rough there, and you pair him with, say, Flowers, who just got way too much.
Yeah. We had a comment coming in here.
My guy.
Joe Ciccoletti saying that Lamar is behind Josh Allen as second most pressured quarterback.
Jalen's up there, which is hilarious.
I kind of want to see that sourced actually, because from what I pulled up just in pressure dropbacks, they're both below average. So maybe it might depend on how you're defining pressure. It might just be that stuff is kind of arbitrarily charted because there's not.
Wait, I thought you were doing a joke. Are you doing a bit?
No.
He means like pressure, like.
Okay, I got you.
Well, I was booing because I thought you were doing a bit.
No, my bad. I follow now.
He meant like media pressure.
Yeah, that makes
kind
more
of
sense.
Narrative pressure. Yeah, and it's an interest. That's why I said I think Jalen. Funny enough, the media has made sure he's on that list because I think people are questioning if he's even going to be the quarterback next year. Stroud. Probably up there since the Texans are kind of contenders. Yeah. Stroud's probably on your pressure list also.
Well, when I first saw that, I was like, I can't imagine that anyone was pressured more last year than Justin Herbert.
Yeah.
But yeah, my bad, Joe.
That was
good,
funny.
Good stuff.
That's how you know. That's how you know Shane is just thinking ball. He's not worried about what they're saying on Get Up or what the narratives out there. Shane's just focused on ball.
All right, let's roll on to the Cincinnati Bengals, who went 6-11 last season. They lose Trey Hendrickson, lose Joseph Osai, lose Noah Fant. They add Boye Mafe, Brian Cook, Jonathan Allen, and Joe Flacco, which might be important. Because the biggest question for the Bengals is, can they protect Joe Burrow? Will he stay healthy? We watch him get sacked in the first quarter of the first preseason game because they're a stupid organization that plays him in the preseason and lets him get hit. But he's had a season-ending injury in 2 of the last 3 seasons. And he had one as a rookie. And so when he plays, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and the Bengals offense can play with anybody. But when he doesn't play, which is far too frequently, they have a defense that can't stop anybody. In each of the last 4 seasons, the Bengals have ranked no higher than 25th in defensive EPA. So they have the second easiest schedule in the league. They're 23rd in rest differential at -4 days. They're over-under win totals at 10.5. But I find myself saying the only thing that matters is if Joe Burrow stays healthy, which is a 50-50 proposition.
I'm in. I'm Bengals FC this year. I do think there's a little bit of people are a little low on Cincinnati. Not Vegas, 10.5. Pretty respectful number. I'm going over. I have them at 12 wins. I do think people are forgetting how good Joe Burrow is and forgetting how good this offense is when he's out there because of how intermittent he's been out there recently. But when you have Burrow and Jamar and T. Higgins and Chase Brown, I actually think the O-line's not as bad as people make it out to be. So I'm not really, I think that's more of a when Burrow is out, it looks even worse. But the defense is obviously a hot topic. I am buying in that the defense is going to be 15th to 20th.
That would be a career year for the Bengals defense.
It would. We would be dialing it back to the Super Bowl year, or maybe the year after the Super Bowl year, where they went to the AFC Championship after. That might still be in that 4-year range, though. I'm not sure. But this is a funny thing. Again, the NFL chat I bring up way too much. They have called me out a lot for being high on the Bengals and not high on the Cowboys, because I'm out on the Cowboys defense. I don't think the Cowboys defense can get to that 15th to the 20th marker. I think they're going to be bottom 5 again. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that I feel differently about those two defenses. I think the Bengals added a lot of competent NFL players this offseason to the defense. They added 4 real starters. Brian Cook, who is a fine safety. I'm not going to tell you that the PFF grade, which has him 4th among safeties last year, is accurate. I don't believe it is. But he got $15 million per year. He's one of the highest paid safeties in football. The Bengals made him that this year. I think he is a huge improvement on either Kyle Duggar or what has happened to Jordan Battle these last couple years. You look at the fact that they added obviously Boye Mafe to a big contract. Boye Mafe is a guy who I've liked for a while since his draft. He was a guy who I thought the Eagles might potentially sign this year. Dexter Lawrence is obviously the huge addition, but next to Dexter Lawrence, they added Jonathan Allen, who they also gave 10 to 15 million, something in that range. I forget exactly the number. But you look at the fact that they added 4 guys who I think are very clearly starters, and one guy in Dexter Lawrence who I think is one of the, I don't know the number, 10 to 20 to 30. I'd have to really stack. That's an interesting topic. One of the top 10, 20, 30 defensive players in football, one of the best players at his position at defensive tackle. I think adding an elite guy like that, adding 3 other starters around Dexter Lawrence in Mafe, Allen, and Cook to an elite guy in Dexter Lawrence, to a defense that is stepping into year 2 of Al Golden. And while it was bad last year, I think it was 28th. The year before it was 32nd. They did take incremental steps from being the worst defense of all time 2 years ago until Dallas, I think, broke it last year. But I do think that there's enough to hope on with Cincinnati. With those 4 additions, you obviously have a couple of those young guys. We can see if they step up. I think the jury's out on a lot of that. But I think they've added enough NFL talent to that defense, stepping into year 2 of a legitimate defensive coordinator in Al Golden. And I think, obviously, I always kind of predict as if guys are going to mostly stay healthy. So I'm predicting as if Burrow's going to stay healthy. Hey, if Burrow gets hurt, I'm an idiot, and I'm wrong. But I'm predicting that the Bengals are going to be really good as long as Burrow's healthy this year.
Yeah. Well, you said there's a lot of hope. Let's talk about a team that has no hope.
Let's be quick on this one. Jeez.
Yeah, the Cleveland Browns go 5-12 last year. They lose Wyatt Teller. They lose Ethan. I never know how to say his last name. Pocic? Yeah.
I think so.
And they lose Myles Garrett via that blockbuster trade to acquire Jared Verse. They bring in a new head coach in Todd Monken. They draft Spencer Fano in the first round. They draft KC Concepcion in the first round. They draft Denzel Boston in the second round. They go out and they get Zion Johnson and Elton Jenkins for their interior offensive line. There's 2 questions for the Browns. First question is, will Todd Monken be one and done? Second question is, will the Browns best the Dolphins and Cardinals in the race for the number 1 overall pick? And that's really it, right? There's nothing else to talk about with this team. There's no hope for this team. This is a team that is trotting Deshaun Watson out there in a QB battle with Shedeur Sanders. This is an egregiously bad football team that has no quarterback on the roster, and they're going to put Deshaun Watson out. Whatever. 6th easiest schedule, 16th in rest differential at 0, and their over-under win totals at 5.5. Smash the under.
Yeah, this is a huge play for the under. I have them winning 2 games. I feel horrible. I will say, when you were running through like the things that they did this offseason, I was kind of like, I kind of like a lot of it. Like, it's kind of like I like KC, I like Boston, I like Spencer Fano, I like Emmanuel McNear-Warren, who they drafted on defense. Like, I like the draft. I didn't like the Myles Garrett trade. I think that probably should have been a more picks focused trade instead of. I know Verse is really good, but I think I would have preferred a more pick-laden thing. And also, I would have preferred trading with any team that's not the Rams, because I think the Rams are going to be good no matter what. I don't think there's any upside in that pick. I'd rather like trade with Dallas, to be honest, or like Chicago maybe, where I think
Dallas can't admit they made a mistake at edge rusher.
That's going to be interesting. This isn't a tangent, but I think people are just like assuming that they're going to trade for Max Crosby. And I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Like you just said, I don't think they will. Like, I don't think they're going to trade for a guy to pay him huge when they just traded Parsons. I guess they did it with Quinn and Williams, but I don't know. I kind of agree with you there. But yeah, it's the Browns are a joke. I can't believe they're trotting out Deshaun Watson PR-wise or football-wise. It's an absolute. I unlike anything I've ever seen in the NFL.
I wouldn't justify it regardless, but if you're going to trot him out there, PR wise, he better at least make sense football wise. And I still wouldn't condone it, but he doesn't even make sense. Like, he's a terrible quarterback. He's a terrible human being. Why would you not just play Shedeur Sanders or Dylan Gabriel? Both guys you took in last year's draft. Are they both bad? Yes. Play them anyways in their second year and see if they've got anything. They don't. And then go get your quarterback. There's no reason to put Deshaun Watson back in the public line. Like just keep him inactive until his contract becomes cuttable and never mention his name again. But they are choosing once again to put him put him forward as the face of their franchise and what people are talking about. It's absurd.
Shameful. Yeah, I don't have much more to say. I will say, defense, I did my top 32 offensive and defensive rankings. I don't know when I'll put that out at some point on Twitter, but I did it predicting EPA. And I've seen a couple other people doing like ranking offenses and defenses. People are still putting the Browns like top 10 to 12. I think that's nuts. I think they're going to be, especially when you factor in like the fact that their offense is going to be horrible and can't move the ball and they're going to be on the field all game long. It's going to be a bottom 10 defense. I know that there's pieces on it. It's going to be a bad defense. I'm Jim Schwartz leaving for a complete unknown, by the way, also stepping in. Not that I'm the biggest Jim Schwartz guy, but this is not going to be a good defense.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is going to about do it for this one. Mark, before we get out of here, you got any final thoughts that you want to drop on the people?
I do. You mentioned fantasy at the beginning, and I guess I'll say a note about fantasy and then kind of go against that note. The note is don't freak out. Don't overreact to the preseason. I don't know why I was I was so unprepared for it this year, because I do my rankings all June, July, early August, and I have my rankings pretty set in stone. And this last week or two, the fantasy nut jobs out there are overreacting to every piece of information we get from the preseason, from training camp, and I forgot how insane it is. I forgot how insane this mid-August, like, oh, actually, this guy who has been going in the 8th round for the last 3 months should go in the 5th round now because the coach said something nice about him. And it's like, okay, like, people are pump the brakes, people. And then now also, I will say, Luther Burden, that injury, bump Rome Odunze up the rankings. So I'm doing the opposite, but I do think Rome Odunze consistently kind of underrated by the fantasy heads out there. Maybe it's because he's not a high, like, he doesn't get like 100 catches. He's kind of like a guy who's going to get those 60 to 70 catches, but be really productive with them. Maybe not a high yards per route run, but I'm still a really big Rome Odunze guy. Shane remembers how high I was on him in the draft process, and thought the first half of last year he really, really showed up and showed out. Had a foot injury down the stretch. He said that that's his new normal. But then he kind of came back and he's like, that was a dumb thing I said. He was like, I didn't mean it how it sounded. He's like, I just meant like I had to like adjust to it. And like, he's like, my foot feels great. He's like, I'm not just like hurt all the time. Like, he was like, I'm sorry I said that. He's like, the PR people told me after I said it how dumb it was. It was pretty funny. But yeah, I think Rome Odunze is going to have a really big year.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. Thank you for joining us for episode number 240 of Chalk Talk, our NFC and AFC North preview. Again, if you enjoy what you heard on this show, you can go back and check out last week's episode when we broke down the East divisions. Next week, we'll break down the South divisions, Mark. Let's save the West for the end because it's the most interesting, I think. So next week, we'll be breaking down the NFC and AFC South. And then we will follow that up with the NFC and AFC West the following week. And that should bring us about to the regular season when we'll be back in our rhythm of every week giving you the most important storylines from every non-Eagles game. So we know most of our audience is Eagles fans. We are on an Eagles podcast feed, but we'll talk about every game and give you guys some takeaways. We're going to unveil a new segment this year, too, at the end of the episode where we are going to cancel a team every week, starting at week 1. And if we do it correctly, canceling one team per week, we should be left with the 14 playoff teams going into week 7 or going into week 18. Or actually after week 18. So we should have it down to 15. Maybe we'll have to cancel 2 one week. So going into week 18, we've predicted the playoffs, but that'll be fun exercise to do. So I hope you guys will hang out with us throughout the season. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. We live stream on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to watch us live, it'll be in the podcast feed. Drop us a 5-star rating wherever you stream your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Shane Half NFL. He's at Mark Henry Jr. NFL. And we will catch you guys next time.